Hi, BookTube. Welcome to a nonfiction review. This may be the least, but also, ironically, the most appropriate review for Boxing Day, while we're in the middle still of this season of goodwill and compassion, which is also the season of overconsumption. It's also another example of me being late to the party, again, late to the BookTube party, finally covering a novel which was reviewed extensively by BookTube and BookTalk when it came out. I watched quite a few of those videos, and they managed to get me interested in the story without giving away too many details of the plot, particularly how the book ends. I'm going to try to emulate that example and get a few more people, talk a few more people into choosing this short novel, which the Times newspaper has referred to as grimly engrossing. Today we are reviewing Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, published in 2020 by Pushkin Press. This book has been so well received on BookTube and BookTalk, I don't know if I need to cover my first question and pitch this novel. Maybe if there's someone who's arrived on BookTube since 2023 and you honestly don't know this title, this is for you, okay? Tender is the Flesh is an example of speculative fiction asking the question, what if? So, what if a new virus appeared which made all animals unfit for food? Literally poisonous. It's easy to imagine, of course, initially there'd be many, many deaths from famine. But what about beyond that? What about the future? How would humanity find a way to cope? Bazterrica decides on a nightmarish possibility, and her narrative leads us through each stage as if she were our tour guide. I put off reading the book initially because I thought the story details would be too disturbing. The truth is that I am disturbed by how little I was disturbed. Okay, book details, how long is it? How much did I pay? Where did I get it? All that good stuff. The paperback is 219 pages long. Only 211 of those are text. And the text is really laid out for quick, easy reading. The font is 12 point. There's a half line space between each line of text. Good white space around the pages. So all in all, designed for a very smooth reading experience. I bought this book before I started my BookTube channel back, I think, January 2023. And it all centered around the fact that a branch of Waterstones had opened up at the Rushden Lakes shopping center. Now, this is not a world-famous location, but locals will know what I'm talking about. Northamptonshire, the county where I live, has a reputation for being a bit of a bookshop desert. In fact, it has been called the Kansas of England, although I'd be willing to bet that Kansas has got a lot more bookshops. So you see, the opening of a branch of Waterstones was a special occasion. And while I was there browsing, I met one of the staff, the sort of age she could have her own BookTalk channel, came over seeing me that I was browsing the books on the table and just started chatting. And she said that she'd read Tender is the Flesh and that it was the most disgusting book she'd ever read, which was a sort of a good advertisement. But it was really her enthusiasm that impressed me. Book lovers love other book lovers, so I really hope that she made a small amount of commission on the books that she sold to me. What do we know about the author? Agustina Bazterrica was born in 1974, grew up in Buenos Aires, and she was in a household of avid readers. She studied fine art at the University of Buenos Aires. Then, for 22 years, she balanced creative writing with paid office work. I know how that feels. In 2013, her first novel, Matar a la Niña, or Kill the Girl, was published. But it was only in 2021, when Tender is the Flesh was translated into English, that Bazterrica was able to make a living from her writing. BookTube regulars will know that this book became a TikTok sensation, and it also won Argentina's Premio Clarán de Novela Award for Spanish Literature in 2017. Bazterrica's latest work is a collection of short stories titled 19 Claws and a Blackbird, and that came out in 2023. Her next translated novel, The Unworthy, is coming out this March. Regarding setting, the novel does not specify any place names. The fact that the characters all have Spanish names means it's quite safe to presume that Bazterrica is creating a future imagining of Argentina. However, we know that Argentina's got a reputation for being a nation of big meat eaters, but there was a survey conducted in 2022 by nutritionists in Buenos Aires province, and they were surprised to learn that 12% of people identified themselves as either vegetarian or vegan, and that compares to only 5.8% of people in the UK who identify themselves the same, and that was according to a Finder survey. So the point is that a lot of countries rely heavily on animal products, and not just for food production. Bazterrica crosses this taboo boundary line where she goes beyond and she says, let's imagine what would happen if humans became the only safe source of all those animal products. Narration and its style. Here's where I got to tell on myself. I disliked the narrative style pretty much immediately. Point of view was third person, and we were focused in on the protagonist, but the narrator would not state his name. Characters closest to the protagonist were all referred to as if they were just other objects. They were called by proper nouns: his father, his mother-in-law, his sister, his wife. It took me 30 pages before I finally came to the point where I learned the protagonist's surname, and that's just because there was another character calling out for him. And then it took me, I think it was page 52, when I finally learned his first name because he was remembering conversations with his father. So I knew that he was Marcos Trejo. That's when I got the whole name. And this drove me nuts initially, absolutely nuts, because it felt like somehow I was being kept at a distance from the main character. And meanwhile, the narrator was feeding me everything that they decided I needed to know about Marcos and the world that he occupied. So it was a novel that could be used as an example of telling rather than showing. And anybody who's been taught creative writing knows that we are pushed to do the opposite thing. We're pushed to do more showing than telling. And of course, all that teaching builds up in anybody who's tried to do creative writing courses, builds up a prejudice, doesn't it? It was that prejudice that I was acting on as I was reading and taking in this very strange, distanced narrative. And yet, the question that I'm left with, if I'm going to disapprove of this narrative, is what do I think would have been the better way to write the novel? Did I want a third-person narrative where the narrator took a little bit more of a background role, created for me that illusion that I was actually living inside Marcos Trejo's head, getting everything through his senses, having full access to all his memories? Did I want that? Did I want a first-person narration? If we'd have had either of those, yes, it would have moved me in much closer to all the detail, but that would have moved me in a lot closer to all the grisly horror, all the unsettledness, all the sharp, painful memories. And I actually think it would have made this book much more difficult to read, perhaps for me too difficult to read. So oddly, I have to admit that Bazterrica's slightly distanced narrative style acts as a safety barrier. For those who've read the book, you'll remember that series of lounges with the one-way glass screens, that Marcos Trejo, he walked through them with a couple of potential employees to see how they would react to seeing every stage of the process of slaughtering. And that is what this narration is like. You are taken through in a protected environment. The narrator protects you by holding you at a slight distance. And so tender is the flesh, therefore it allows you to see the danger, the suffering, to sample it, to get a sense of how this would be without actually having to be immersed in it. Does this novel fit a genre category? Yes. This is speculative dystopian fiction. And like all dystopias, it's really a cultural critique of something that we're not doing very well right now. I liked how the book drew attention to our own moral distortions and illusions by creating slightly different moral distortions and illusions in the character. So every time I questioned the way a character was thinking, it made me double back and question the way I think. And now we come to that question, is there problematic content in this book? This book is never unproblematic. All the way through, the characters are constantly transgressing the moral boundaries of our world because they have relocated those boundaries. The fact that humans are being bred for food and treated the way we treat many animals today, it'll be too much for some readers. Even with that slightly distanced narrative, it won't be safe enough. If you have worked in meat processing, or if, like me, you've actually watched an animal being butchered, you may find that you get through some parts of the book with less trouble, but that will still be disturbing of itself. It will show up that essential hypocrisy that humans have had to deal with since we grew brains that were big enough to become self-aware of ourselves as meat eaters. And at this point, anthropologists and mythologists, they all speculate that we had to find a way to live with being meat eaters with the recognition that we were animals eating other animals. Tender is the Flesh almost takes you back to that moment and lets a modern reader deal with that awareness all over again. And yet it's also a novel about the modern industrial capitalist world and how the pressure to maintain that system of living as our population grows, it probably is already shifting our moral boundaries. And this book lets us ask more dramatic questions about that, more serious questions about that. What is the context and purpose of that problematic content? Well, Tender is the Flesh reminded me just how much civilization rests on a very fragile foundation, that we are really all just barbarians with boundaries. And we try and keep the chaos of ourselves down to a minimum, but our usual ways of doing that often involve, in one way or another, privileging a minority of people, protecting them, and excluding or at least giving lesser privileges to the larger number of people. And the characters in the novel here, they're all doing the same thing. It's really just a variation on the theme of the present day and as much human history as I can think of. Any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? Well, I'm the last person that you should ask if you're looking for a new dystopian fiction title. So let's talk about Argentinian writers instead. The only other Argentinian author I actually know was Jorge Luis Borges. Google told me that there were over 50 other writers that I could get to know. So I nosed around, I found an article that was appropriately titled The Greatest Argentinian Books of All Time, to get some new names. Now, there was a clear predominance of male writers. I had to go down the list and get to number 22 of 50 before we finally got to a woman. And so this is the title I'm recommending, January by Sara Gallardo. I recommend it if you can stomach a tough read, because I'm told it is the story of a rape victim told from her viewpoint. This was the author's debut work, first published in Spanish in 1958, and it was groundbreaking because of its content. And that's another review done. On Sunday, I'm going to be posting a non-fiction review and maybe mentioning my reading stats so far for the end of 2024, because everybody I'm seeing on BookTube right now seems to be gearing up for their 2025, lots of New Year goal-setting videos. I'm still enjoying my post-Read What You Own challenge freedom. That said, it might interest you to know that the book that I review on Sunday is only the second one that I've purchased since the 31st of October. I haven't been tempted to buy a lot of new books, and I'm just wondering, has the challenge changed me for good? We shall see. But I'm wishing everybody success with whatever reading goals they set themselves for next year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.